We are now streaming live on YouTube with Emilie Colker. I'm going to go ahead and make you the speaker. And so I'm going to give a quick introduction for Emilie Colker before we jump in. And this is full transparency lifted from the IDEO website. So we'll start there. So Emilie Colker is Managing Director of IDEO London. She is passionate about leading teams in a way that encourages them to take creative leaps. And for 20 years, she has held marketing and digital leadership roles in businesses experiencing waves of innovation and change. In those roles and her current position at IDEO, Emilie delivers tangible results for early stage companies focused on growth, as well as legacy brands looking to solve diverse problems, seize new market opportunities, and deliver impact in the world. Much of her work has involved defining or redefining market strategies for brands and helping them connect with new local and global audiences, building optimal click-to-brick experiences, and orchestrating complex digital transformations that emphasize new ways of working, like learning through doing, as much as enhanced systems and platforms. Welcome, Emilie.
Thank you. I don't think anybody has ever read my bio back to me. It's a very strange experience.
Oh, yes.
Thank
I
you.
took out little bits that were, in your voice because that seemed a little strange. But yeah, it's so nice to be here with you. And thanks for joining us late UK time. But we're so glad you're here. Well, you're here with us. And we're going to start. So with our previous Fireside chats, we have just sort of jumped into the big questions. And I actually want to take us first through some lighter, rapid questions. Does that sound okay?
Sounds absolutely fine. It sounds also very appropriate to having a cup of tea in hand and it being 9:10 in the evening.
And hopefully this does still feel like that, relaxed fireside chat. So I know you're a big podcast fan, Emilie. So just off the top of your head, can you remember what podcast you most recently listened to?
I absolutely can, because I had the privilege today and yesterday to go into the studio, which is not something that I have done in more than a year. And so just the commute is perfect time to catch up on my podcasts. And I have been obsessed with listening to a podcast that's actually based off of a US show called Dissect. And it's the British version called Decode. And it's the first series that they've done, and it's focused on hip hop artist Dave's album called Psychodrama that came out probably the end of 2019. And it's incredible because it speaks to kind of the zeitgeist, this particular kind of cultural moment that exists in Britain. And he's just an unbelievable lyricist. And I would say, like, he does triple entendres, not just double entendres. And it's just, I couldn't recommend it more. It literally breaks down line per line of every song in his album. So that's wonderful. And then on the weekend, I was alone and I listened to another podcast. I don't know if any of you have listened to Mayim, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her name. She was Blossom, Mayim Bailik's breakdown. And she's brilliant. That's a really good fun. She focuses a lot on like the mind-body connection. She's a neuroscientist in addition to an actor and a public figure, and I really like that one.
How cool. Those were not at all what I was expecting. I was waiting on, an
You want some
innovation or a
businessy
leadership.
ones?
Businessy one, which I know you also like the businessy ones, but I love those two in particular. Have you listened to Song Exploder too?
I have listened to Song Exploder. I'm a big fan of making sure I get my all songs considered in songs of the week, in addition to my Spotify weekly songs.
And hopefully, as we're starting to commute again, well, actually, some of us will actually have opportunity to more time to listen to podcasts.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay, we're not going as rapid as.
Sorry, I'll go way faster.
No, I was really enjoying it. So we'll luxuriate where we want to. What has been one of your most enjoyable work experiences?
I'm not sure what it says, that I can't think of one. But the ones that I have, the ones I would say that I have in common that have been enjoyable have been all ones that have been focused around connection and travel. I think traveling together tends to be when unexpected things happen. People take off their kind of professional hats and become a whole person. If you have to sit next to someone on a plane, you really get to know them or their preferences. I can think of sales conferences at the end of the 2000s that were amazing. When I worked for a global company, it was the only time the whole company got together. And I can think of some incredible trips to India, for example, and seeing some social impact work in person. Just memories with people, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. So connection and travel. And we didn't get to go to India together. We did work together on some of those social impact projects. We didn't get to go to India together, but and we did get to join the Unreasonable Group Accelerator together, which was also a pretty great experience. Great. So, what do people get wrong about you?
Probably have to ask them more than me, but I think a lot of people think I'm a workaholic, which sounds horrible to say out loud. And I think people think that because when I know what I'm working towards, I have a lot of energy, and I'm very efficient, and I'm good at being present, and I code switch a lot. But and for that reason, people see me across a lot of different things, especially in my current role, for example. But mostly I manage my energy well, and so that means that the things that I'm really in, and I will give a lot to them, but I'm not in everything. I'm just in the things that I know that I can act, and make sure that I'm the right person to be there. And then I set really clear expectations around that. So a lot of people kind of see the fact that I'm showing up, and I'm showing up intensely, if you will, with passion, is often interpreted as kind of a sense of workaholism.
Got it.
I don't know, you've worked with me, maybe you would have a better response to this question than me.
We worked from a distance. I think your decisiveness comes through, and but that's probably something true.
I think that's true too. I think that's true too. I definitely have a bias towards action and getting all the inputs to make decisions.
Yeah. Okay, and so what are some, or what do you think are some cliches about leadership that are actually true? Or maybe just one.
One of the things I learned last year is there's been a real move away from traditional leadership, which is often seen as kind of dictatorial. But actually, I would say that one of the things I really learned is, particularly in times of uncertainty, asking people to take the initiative can be a huge cognitive and emotional load. And so sometimes people want direction, actually. They find it helpful, they find it useful, and I feel like there's been a move away from that. And I think you can still be an empowering leader, a servant leader, while providing direction. So I would say that that's definitely a cliche that's true. It's a question of how you deliver that direction.
Yes. Yeah. And that makes sense in the context of the last year in particular. All right. And then one last rapid question before we go deeper, although I feel like some of these have gone deeper. What is your superpower?
I hate the idea that we only get one.
What is a superpower that you have?
I'm a really fast learner. I can learn fast and I can work fast. I've had to learn actually at times to make sure that I slow down, because I can either be missing things or people aren't working at the same pace, and it's important to help people to match the pace of other people that you're working with. So I would say it's a superpower that I'm a fast learner, because I can get a lot done, because I don't need a whole lot of repetition around training things. Yeah, and it means that I get exposed to a lot of different things. And I can make choices around those things.
Yes, and all your many different podcast topics.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So thanks for going with me on that. Now we're going to dig into the juicy stuff. And broadly, we're going to cover 3 different areas. So one is around personal, one is around leadership, and one is around culture. And within those, it'll sort of cross around. There might be some stuff around social impact. and I have so many questions, partly because I do know you pretty well. But as we go, if one of these on the list comes forward, that's totally fine. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. And if you want to kind of go deeper into a specific area because you can think of something we've done together or that might be interesting, also
Yeah.
please don't hesitate to push me.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Um, so, what would you say right now, at least, is your personal mission, North Star, or purpose?
I think I mentioned this to you on email, Delia, but I have a lot of people issues I'm trying to manage at the moment, and so I think I'd be influenced by that in terms of what it is. I think not not being afraid to not be an expert and to bring in the expertise of others, I would say is very linked to my personal issue, my personal purpose and mission. But at the end of the day, I think I don't think I have one that's more complex than to be a good person, to be kind and compassionate, to help people feel like they can rely on me, but to also trust that I will call on them when I need to, so it feels reciprocal. I'd say that probably feeling like I can rely on experts, and they can rely on me.
Hmm. Very people centric. That's very cool. Thanks for sharing, Emily. And I think that can be a tough question too, asking about, big picture purpose. Most people don't have, that level of clarity. So I think that's really
I
very
think often
insightful.
people would I think I would be inspired to answer the question more thematically, but because I'm really navigating some uncharted territory in terms of some of the personnel issues that I'm dealing with at the moment, it has to be people centric because I've realized that if I'm not making decisions based on kind of the good of the individual and the good of the whole, that I'm probably making decisions based on the business instead of what's right for that person.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's so spot on too, that our sense of purpose and personal mission changes based on the context
Mm-hmm.
that we're in. So that makes so much sense given the situation you're in. And then a slight step to the side, what motivates you in your work? And when has your work felt most juicy and delightful for you?
I think it comes back to that point around connection. I spent a lot of time recently thinking about what it means to come together, what it means to work together, my personal preferences in terms of how I want to structure my energy, structure my day, structure my connections. And so I think it really is about um, moments of community. Earlier we were talking about flow,
Mm-hmm.
and it's when I'm in flow with someone, when we're learning together, when we're, exploring insights together. Those are moments that are delightful. They're moments when I feel like I'm learning in the moment. I'm conscious of learning in that moment versus um, simply making progress towards something. Um, that certainly makes me feel like work is juicy and delightful. I would also say if that's the more kind of social element, the more kind of extroverted element, I also I really thrive on the moments of being able to be, quote unquote, heads down. Moments when I'm creating, moments when I'm making something, moments when I'm digging into content. Um, that makes me feel like I'm leaving something behind. I'm putting my fingerprints on something. I'm not just speaking rhetoric.
Mm.
And that's probably the more introverted side too.
Yeah. This isn't in our questions, but do you identify as introverted, extroverted, somewhere in between?
It's tough, isn't it? Those are words that have been bandied around for so long. They probably
Yeah.
require some re-examination. But um, for most people, they're surprised when I call myself an introvert. But what I would say is I'm much more on the introverted scale in its truest definition in terms of where you get your energy from. But I'm a very well practiced extrovert because I don't think that until recently we've had the privilege of being introverts at work. The people who have been most rewarded have been those who have been most vocal, have been most present, in terms of their presence, most visible, those who've engaged engaged with people in moments when they see opportunity. And those aren't things that introverts tend to do unless they're pushed to do it. So I would say that, the last 25 years or so, I've had to learn how to be an extrovert, and I've had to find ways to recover from that to suit my preferred state.
Yes. Yeah. And has this year been helpful for you in that?
Very honestly, I'm being super transparent here. I think it has it's promoted bad behavior.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is there's a lot of aspects in which um, I feel like I can manage my energy better because I'm in a known environment, because I'm in an environment that I get to control more, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. However, because I'm not forced to be in as many uncomfortable situations that require the practiced extrovert of me to be there, I get to choose how I show up on screen.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that, for example, if I have a difficult issue or I'm kind of feeling low energy, I perhaps don't show up in the way in which I would force myself to had I been somewhere in person, because I have the privilege of being this box on the screen. Um, and therefore, I can manage my body language by just, distributing the energy from the neck up. So I would say it has helped me manage my energy, but it's probably also encouraged that type of behavior, which I wouldn't be able to get away with. And I would consider bad behavior in terms of avoidance behaviors um, that otherwise I had to face head on.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that vulnerable insight and experience for you. Yeah, I think we're only going to know the full impact of the last year plus, years from now, probably, in terms of our own personal experiences through it and learned behaviors or practiced behaviors, or who we are, how it's shaped our identities too. So that's kind of incredible that you've already noticed these things through the last just year plus. But I really appreciate you sharing that, Emilie. And I'll keep us going. So we're going to transition into the leadership questions,
Okay.
which I'm sure connect back to some of what we've already talked about. So, and what you just shared. So, knowing, this has been a really odd last and challenging, as everyone has said, last year and a half. How would you most love to be seen and understood as a leader, both in this time and, beyond in general?
I think there's something difficult about associating a title like leader with yourself. Somewhat because it's banded around so much in terms of levels within an organization, but also because it's something you aspire to be, and so when you adopt the title, it suggests some form of kind of being static. And so I don't know that I have a great answer for you other than I suppose there's two ways for me to answer this. One is kind of the struggles I'm having with leadership right now in terms of what I'm seeing in the market with clients, with colleagues, et cetera, in terms of how leadership is showing up. And the other is around how you can balance professionalism, caring for people, and seeing people truly as who they are, not simply as employees, but then also wanting to kind of push people, and that includes myself, but figuring out exactly how far you can push things. And to me, those are all things that are true to me. I used to get a criticism from partners when I was younger. I was too motherly. I'm the eldest child. I took care of my siblings a lot, so I care a lot about people, and I really do see them as the key. But I'm also pretty private, and so in this world where we're emphasizing, excessive vulnerability as a mode of leadership, I have struggled with figuring out what that looks like in terms of not having to cry in meetings if that doesn't feel right. And also thinking about what it means to be professional, when sometimes being professional means shielding people or having an inability to share everything and therefore being interpreted as kind of withholding. Um, So it's a long way of answering your question, but I want to be seen as a person, and a person who is able um, to move with others as the person who I am, right? And like I said, I'm someone who pushes myself, and I like others to push themselves, and who sees the fact that you can care about people. They don't have to be a data point.
Mm. Whew, there was so much in there. I loved what you shared about, your experience as the oldest sibling and what that means in terms of how you care for people, the challenges of being vulnerable. I think most of us in the group have Brene Brown Dare to Lead on the shelf and listen to her podcast. And, we've talked a lot about vulnerability and heard a lot about it, not only in this group, but, in public discourse in the last few years. And I actually think it's very vulnerable to say that you struggle with that vulnerability as a leader and kind of grapple with what that means and what it requires of you, and where it isn't actually in alignment with who you are.
Well, and I think to me, it comes back to flexibility, right? There's no one way you can be a consistent leader and flex your style regularly, thinking about when you should be at the front of the room, in the middle of the room, in the back of the room. And I think that's the same thing in terms of how we need to accommodate different people's vulnerability. I think we have a very Western view of what it means to be vulnerable. And I think that there are different ways in which you can show up and demonstrate that you don't have all the answers, that you are not here to command people, that you are open, that you are with others, and it doesn't require excessive amounts of oversharing if people aren't comfortable. I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't overshare, but that's one way of doing it.
Yeah, and there's certainly I think you were just sort of hinting towards the importance of consent, in that vulnerability and what that looks like and how you show up with a team, with even just another individual as a leader. That's a piece I think is a word that we don't often use in leadership spaces, but is, kind of there between the lines of what you're sharing.
I think so too. I think there's, one more thing I would say about it is we rarely use the word privilege next to vulnerability, but to me, there is a privilege, and it's often people who are in power positions who get to be vulnerable. You have earned the right to be vulnerable. You've earned the audience, or you have an audience. And in other cases, you can be seen as whining or ungrateful, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this in different ways. So I have as you can hear, I think it is very complex, and I think very too often we're kind of brushing over it by emphasizing actually a form of authenticity that for some people can exist in terms of sharing very personal things.
Yes. So I'm going to take us forward and make sure that the League of Impact Leaders has abundant time with you in our second half, and take us forward to some questions around culture and innovation and social impact, which are all big, dense topics on their own. So we'll see how we bring them together. But you work at IDEO, you lead a whole big group at IDEO, and we've worked on a team together that was very innovative, that led to some of us from that team going over and leading innovation within a company. And so, I want to talk about innovation and culture. So I'm curious, from your experience, Emilie, what is required in order to create an innovative culture?
It's just a small question.
Just a small question. Or maybe we could even start by what does an innovative culture look like or do? Or what have you seen in your own experience?
Well, first of all, I love the fact that you're putting the two words together. I was just speaking to a journalist last week around how too often innovation is seen as a process, or it's seen as a department. And I'm a big believer that it's about the mindsets and the behaviors as much as it is about the practices. So I love that you're tying it to culture, which is often kind of the missing link. For me, there are two, really big parts about the culture. One is like my emphasis is on delivering a strategy that is made tangible uh, for everybody, internally and externally. That becomes a cultural practice of what innovation is. Innovation should be how we imagine the future in a way that aligns with our strategy and moves us towards the outcomes that we want to achieve. Do that and weave it into the fabric of a business. It's about delivering a team, the people who have those values, those behaviors to continually drive that innovation. I guess the way it used to be is innovation used to be about a thing, the thing that was created, and now it's very much around the team. But it can't be a single team, right? It has to be an ethos that's spread amongst an entire organization.
Yes.
Rather than peanut over here.
Yes, and I actually, Emily, I want to ask if you can repeat, because I think it was so important what you just shared about the role of innovation in relationship to strategy. Yeah, you just put that together in such a beautiful set of puzzle pieces that made it so clear.
Did I miss the question? I'm really sorry,
Oh,
Julie.
sorry. Oh, no, I was just asking if you could say that one more
Oh, yes, of
time,
course.
how you
Oh,
explained the relationship between innovation and strategy. I think we have a little bit of, it's like cutting in and out a little bit, so.
sorry. So I guess for me, innovation, I may say this differently than I said it previously, but it's about evidencing strategy or evidencing change that makes strategy tangible. Your strategy should ultimately be about what you're doing next, right? It shouldn't be about what's now. And often that's incredibly intangible for people. So innovation is really that process of ensuring that strategy feels incredibly tangible, relatable, accessible to employees. So everyone who touches it, employees inside the company, as well as your clients or customers or consumers, whoever the actors or audiences are who you touch externally.
Great. Thank you. That just felt very important, especially for folks who are, our group is very interested in innovation and thinking about innovation and culture. But I think anyone tuning into is kind of looking at the cross sections there. And I think the piece about innovation enacting strategy or making tangible strategy is so important, especially folks thinking about an organization at that level.
Yeah.
So then, okay, so we've got the innovation, the strategy, culture is tied into the innovation then, if that's how you're making tangible the strategy. So what does an innovative culture look like in practice? Like, what have you seen in your own experience of, thinking whether it's IDEO, whether it's somewhere else, what can that innovative culture look like?
So I think it's consistent whether you are a startup or whether you're a large organization, personally. I think innovation, besides the kind of the fabric that we talked about before in terms of the mindsets, the culture, is really the process of continually or relentlessly being customer centric. And it's a practice that's perhaps less dramatic than it sounds. It was maybe, I can't remember what year it was, but it was several years ago that Wired said, innovation is a buzzword, has been a buzzword of the past. And at the end of the day, it's about creating real things with a process that enables you to continually iterate and to iterate because you are as customer centric as you should be, in order to make sure that you're solving problems for those customers, not solving problems that the business is looking to deliver. I think very often we conflate transformation and innovation. We see them kind of, transformation being around kind of getting you to a state of being able to innovate. And usually this is kind of legacy pre-internet era businesses. And then we see innovation as kind of being able to get to the next big thing. But at the end of the day, both of those are about maintaining kind of competitiveness or staying relevant. And the only way to stay relevant is to anticipate the needs of your customers. And to anticipate the needs of your customers, you need to be as close as possible to them and you need to continually try things and test things with them. That's the process of innovation. It's much more of a machine rather than kind of a destination. At least
Yes.
to me it is.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. Having worked in innovation, I love that. That
Good. I'm glad we're aligned.
yeah, I think it's so often treated as the answer, or like you said earlier, the process, and actually seeing it as, a machine or a tool or um, you know, making tangible the strategy. Again, I think that's so helpful. For folks who are new to innovation or thinking about it, and thinking about how you might apply innovation in your own work. Okay, and so we're over time on our conversation, but I want to land with one more question, which is about social impact, because this is a group of
Great.
people in our League of Impact Leaders who are deeply committed to making positive impact in the world. You've worked in social impact, and I know it is really important to you as a person, as an individual. And so I would love to just hear, either a story or an example of a way in which I know, you have IDEO.org, or maybe just in your other experiences, that you might have been able to apply innovation principles to social impact.
So, I mean, you've heard me talk a lot about people. And I think, one of our greatest powers is to be creative and to use creativity to invent, right? Innovation comes from the word inventing. And to invent new things, I don't think you can rely on a rational analytical approach, the kind of numbers crunching approach. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't think that you can get to something new. I don't think you can get to something innovative if you do that. However, because people are so unpredictable, because we cannot predict the future, all we can do is imagine it. I think that when you rely on human centricity, you can get to innovation and you can get to new ideas that address social issues in new ways much more readily. I have a ton of examples in this space, but that's what makes it uniquely suited to social impact. At the end of the day, social impact is about ensuring that we have, we impact the individual as much as the community the individual is a part of, as much as the society, and so on and so on. And so, one of my favorite projects that I've worked on over the last 3 years has been with the Wellcome Trust, and the Wellcome Trust is a huge multi-billion pound foundation based in England, but that operates globally. And one of their big strategic pillars is around antimicrobial resistance. And usually that comes from the abundance of overprescription of antibiotics when they aren't necessary. And the reason that antibiotics are doled out is because they treat the symptoms and not the cause. And so people feel like they're receiving value. And worked on a project with them, the Wellcome Trust, specifically in middle-income countries. We're working in Kenya, and we're working in India to think about what are the different ways in which we can impact that system. And obviously you can imagine, it ranges from policymakers to patients to clinicians to community workers, etc. And the reason why innovation works in those cases is because sometimes the answer is about tweaking something very small. It can be about creating a new touch point. It can be around simply changing messaging. It can be around changing a channel. And in this case, we found some really great opportunities with regards to kind of low-hanging fruit to simply connect doctors and increase the trust that is placed on them, because they're seen as people who have your best interest at heart versus the pharmaceuticals company's interests at heart, which sounds so simple. But when you can go to a pharmacy and show them a piece of paper that you just wrote down yourself and get a prescription drug, and you don't need to go to a doctor, actually reestablishing the value of the doctor plays a huge role. And thinking about how you do that at scale and globally is incredibly powerful, and one of the best ways in which you can use innovation. But it doesn't always have to be on that scale, right? There's some amazing stuff happening in the mobility space around reducing hot car deaths. Number of children who die in cars unintentionally is outrageous. And finding new ways to address that when it's a blip of memory, right? And these are things that can be avoided, and yet we have to look at kind of our cognitive understanding. Excuse my cat.
You
To
could
kind of affect behavior
barely
change.
see.
You can barely see her. She's decided that this is an interesting conversation, so she's going to
Oh,
be
hello.
um, so yes, I think kind of it's a long way of saying that innovation done right is a deeply human process, and that makes it incredibly well suited to address social issues, because the heart of those issues is people. Um, and we need to come up with new solutions to address those big issues that impact large numbers of those people on societal level.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emilie. Thank you for rolling with it as we went longer here. And just to save the group a little time, I'll make sure I get from you, Emilie, any links or ways that folks who are watching the YouTube recording can get to know you better, support IDEO, build relationships, any of the ways that that you would most love for viewers to connect with you. Does that sound okay?
Sounds wonderful.
Okay,
I feel
thanks so
very spoiled.
much. We'll hop off YouTube.